I watched my husband pour something into my coffee cup while pretending to add sugar, his hand moving with the practiced casualness of someone who'd clearly rehearsed this exact moment. "Finish it, darling," he said, sliding the cup toward me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, loud enough for our biggest investors, seated around the conference table, to hear the affectionate nickname without noticing anything else unusual. I smiled back, picked up the cup, and pretended to take a small sip while scanning the room, my mind moving faster than I let my expression show. I'd learned to read my husband's smile years ago, the specific tightness at the corners that meant he was performing rather than feeling. That smile had been present for weeks now, ever since I'd started asking uncomfortable questions about quarterly numbers that didn't quite add up. Under the table, my phone buzzed once against my leg. I didn't check it immediately. I didn't need to. I already knew, with the particular clarity that comes from finally understanding something you've been avoiding for months, that whatever he'd just poured into my cup wasn't meant to help me survive this meeting. Instead of drinking it, I calmly reached across the table under the guise of adjusting my notes, and swapped my cup with his. Identical white porcelain, identical saucers, a swap so smooth that even the investor seated directly across from me didn't seem to notice. 20 minutes later, everything my husband had carefully planned for this meeting was about to fall apart in a way he never could have anticipated. My name is Anastasia Volkov, and I co-founded Meridian Capital Partners with my husband Grant 8 years earlier, back when we were still young enough to believe that building something together would only strengthen our marriage rather than eventually threaten to destroy it entirely. We'd started with almost nothing, a small office above a dry cleaner and 3 modest client accounts, both of us working 18-hour days to build what had eventually grown into a respected investment firm managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I'd handle the analytical side, the risk assessment and portfolio strategy that Grant, despite his considerable charm and talent for client relationships, had never fully mastered on his own. That balance had worked for years, complementary skills building something neither of us could have created independently. But somewhere around year 6, something had shifted between us, subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. Grant had started taking credit for strategic decisions that were entirely mine during client meetings. He'd begun making unilateral choices about company direction without consulting me, despite our equal partnership on paper. And 6 months ago, I'd started noticing discrepancies in certain account reconciliations, small enough to potentially be honest mistakes, but consistent enough that my analytical instincts, the same instincts that had built our firm's reputation for precision, refused to dismiss them as coincidence. I hadn't confronted Grant directly about these discrepancies yet, uncertain whether I was seeing genuine impropriety or simply projecting suspicion onto a marriage that had been quietly deteriorating for reasons that had nothing to do with our business. That uncertainty ended 3 weeks before this meeting, when I discovered something on Grant's laptop that had nothing to do with financial discrepancies at all, something that reframed every strange behavior I'd noticed over the previous months into a much darker, more coherent picture. I'd needed to access a shared client presentation folder on Grant's laptop while he was in the shower, a routine task I'd done countless times over our marriage. Instead, I'd accidentally opened his messaging app, still logged in, displaying a conversation thread with a contact saved simply as V. The messages spanned months, intimate and unmistakable, confirming an affair I'd genuinely never suspected, not because Grant was particularly faithful by nature, but because he'd always seemed too consumed by the business to have energy for anything beyond our shared professional life. What made my stomach drop wasn't just the affair itself, though that alone would have been devastating enough. It was a message from 3 weeks earlier, discussing something far more calculated than simple infidelity. "Once the Kessler account transfers fully under my authority," Grant had written, "we won't need her analytical oversight anymore. The board's already questioning her judgment after those discrepancies. A few more months of doubt, and she'll either resign or I'll have grounds to buy out her shares at a fraction of their actual value." I'd read that message 3 times, understanding with sickening clarity that the financial discrepancies I'd noticed weren't accidents at all. Grant had been deliberately manipulating certain accounts, creating a paper trail designed to make my judgment appear increasingly unreliable, all while planning to use that manufactured doubt to eventually push me out of the company we'd built together. I hadn't confronted him that night. Instead, I'd done something Grant would never have expected from the wife he'd apparently already written out of both his marriage and his business plans. I'd started quietly gathering my own evidence, understanding that whatever came next needed to be built on something far more solid than anger alone. Over the following 3 weeks, I worked methodically, documenting every discrepancy I'd previously noticed with careful, dated records, cross-referencing them against the exact timeline of Grant's affair to establish a clear pattern connecting his personal betrayal to his professional manipulation. I also did something Grant never anticipated. I quietly contacted our firm's original founding attorney, a careful, meticulous woman named Beatrice Okonkwo who drafted our original partnership agreement 8 years earlier. Beatrice reviewed the documents I'd gathered, her expression growing increasingly serious as she understood exactly what Grant had apparently been constructing. "This isn't just infidelity," she told me. "This is deliberate fraud designed to manipulate you out of your rightful ownership stake. If what you're describing is accurate, and these documents certainly support it, you have significant legal recourse here, well beyond just a divorce settlement." I hadn't decided yet exactly how I wanted to proceed when Beatrice mentioned something that shifted my entire strategy. "The Hendricks Group meeting next week," she said, referencing our firm's most significant potential investor relationship, worth potentially tens of millions in new managed assets. Grant's been positioning himself as the sole strategic architect of the firm's growth in his pitch materials. If he's planning to eventually push you out anyway, he might try something during that meeting to further undermine your credibility in front of your biggest potential investors. That warning proved prophetic 3 days later, when Grant mentioned, almost casually, that he'd be handling the coffee during our morning prep before the Hendricks meeting. An unusual offer from a man who'd never once in 8 years of marriage prepared coffee for either of us. I understood immediately that whatever Grant was planning, it was about to unfold during the single most important meeting of our firm's recent history. I'd prepared for exactly this possibility, though I hadn't known precisely what form Grant's plan would take. I'd simply understood, given everything I discovered, that he was capable of something significant enough to eliminate whatever threat my continued presence and credibility posed to his plans. When I saw him carefully preparing our coffee that morning before the meeting, adding something to my cup that definitely wasn't sugar, moving with the deliberate carefulness of someone trying not to be noticed, I understood immediately what was happening. I'd already arranged, quietly, for Beatrice to have a colleague present at the meeting, ostensibly representing outside legal counsel for the Hendricks Group's due diligence process, though in reality, present specifically to document whatever unfolded. The swap happened smoothly, my years of careful, precise work translating easily into this one crucial physical action. Grant, confident and oblivious, drank from what he believed was still my cup, continuing his presentation to the Hendricks Group with his usual polished charm, unaware that he'd just consumed whatever substance he'd intended for me. 20 minutes into the meeting, Grant's presentation began to falter, his words slurring slightly, his usual confident cadence replaced by increasing confusion. The Hendricks Group representatives exchanged uncertain glances as Grant struggled to complete basic sentences, clearly disoriented in a way that had nothing to do with normal presentation nerves. "Grant, are you all right?" I asked, my voice carrying genuine concern that wasn't entirely performed, understanding that whatever he'd used wasn't necessarily dangerous, likely some kind of sedative meant to simply incapacitate rather than harm, but concerning nonetheless in its unpredictability. He looked at me then, something like dawning horror crossing his increasingly unfocused expression, as he began to understand, even through his rapidly clouding thoughts, that something had gone catastrophically wrong with whatever he'd planned. Emergency services arrived within minutes, and Grant was taken to the hospital for observation, the sedative apparently strong enough to cause significant disorientation but not life-threatening, according to the paramedics who evaluated him on site. The Hendricks Group meeting, understandably, dissolved into chaos, though I remained composed throughout, providing calm, professional explanations about an apparent medical episode while quietly ensuring Beatrice's colleague documented everything unfolding. In the days that followed, as Grant recovered physically, the legal and professional consequences of his actions became impossible to avoid. Beatrice moved quickly, presenting the evidence we'd gathered, the fraudulent financial manipulation, the affair, and now, an actual toxicology report confirming he'd knowingly administered a sedative intending to incapacitate me during a critical business meeting. Grant's attempt at explanation, once he was lucid enough to offer one, was almost pathetically transparent. He claimed he'd only meant to give me something mild to calm my nerves, a story nobody, including the Hendricks Group representatives who'd witnessed his own incapacitation, found remotely credible. The partnership dissolution that followed was swift and decisive, Beatrice's careful documentation of Grant's fraudulent account manipulation providing more than sufficient grounds for me to acquire full ownership of Meridian Capital Partners at a valuation that reflected the company's actual worth, rather than the diminished value Grant had been attempting to manufacture. Our divorce proceeded alongside the business separation, straightforward given the overwhelming evidence of both his affair and his professional misconduct. Grant's reputation within the investment community, once carefully cultivated over years of charm and strategic relationship building, collapsed entirely once word of the incident spread through our professional networks. I rebuilt Meridian Capital Partners over the following year, retaining the Hendricks Group's business despite the chaotic circumstances of our initial meeting, their representatives ultimately more impressed by my composed handling of an unprecedented crisis than deterred by it. I think about that swapped coffee cup often, the split-second decision that changed the entire trajectory of both my marriage and my career. I don't know what would have happened if I'd simply trusted Grant's smile that morning, if I'd finished that coffee the way he'd expected me to. So I'll ask you what I've asked myself since that meeting. If you discovered someone you trusted was planning something significant enough to incapacitate or undermine you, would you have found the composure to act as carefully as I did? Or would the shock alone have overwhelmed your ability to think clearly in that critical moment?